Good afternoon from Sacred Space at Titania's Realm. I've decided to make another video today, carry on with reading True Tales of Angel Encounters. I've been out for a quick walk around the block. It was a little bit drizzly, but it cleared up while I was out, and I went to visit my friend Rosie Anderson, the golden retriever, who was very happy to see me, which she always is. And then I went further around the block to visit my old friend Jack, the blue healer. He was very happy to see me too. I caught them both snoozing though. I actually woke them both up. And anyway, Jack's mother, Marilyn, who comes from Nottingham in England, came out and chatted with me, which was lovely. And she was telling me her daughter rides from Murray to Mount Nebo every morning, 140 kilometres round trip. It's astonishing, isn't it? Astonishing. That's how I found out where she comes from. I said, whereabouts in England do you come from? Nottingham. I said, oh, we're Robin Hood and Maid Marian and all the... She said, yes. I said, oh, well, that's why your daughter's as fit as a fiddle. We come from strong forest stock. And she said, that's right. Anyway, she's lovely. She's in her 80s herself, and her dog's quite elderly too. He's 17 and getting a bit long in the tooth, but oh, they're lovely, the two of them. Anyway, it was lovely having a chat, and broke up my day a bit, and to force myself to go for a bit of a walk and get out of the house. And all that rain is, we're just so spoilt with the sunshine here in Brisbane. All that rain was starting, that greyness, it's coming over again, was starting to make me feel quite sad and depressed, which isn't like me. I usually manage. I haven't been depressed in quite a long time actually, because I usually manage it by doing what I do, dancing, storytelling, being creative. But yeah, too much grey weather, and I started to feel a bit bloody blah blah blah. Anyway, so I thought I would continue reading. The time is 2:57 p.m. and it's the 3rd of April still. It's my second video today. But I could go back and attempt the soldering of the bezel strips that I have to hand cut and hand make and fit properly, and then after 2 attempts of melting them and them not being right, I feel frustrated and distressed and depressed about that too. But I was going to go back and do it today, but I'll do it when my head feels clear and focused and confident. I think today I'll just have a rest from all that disappointment. And but I'll stick to what I can do, which is read stories rather eloquently. I always liked reading, even as a child. So it fills up my day, and some of my YouTube audience enjoy it too. So it's a win-win-win situation for everybody all round, isn't it? Anyway, my hands smell of dog now, but I don't mind. They're my dog friends. Guardian Angels. It's not a terribly long chapter, so I think we should fit it into 1 hour-long video, maybe. Jesus said that every child has an angel. Many of the accounts in this section involve the intervention of guardian angels in children's lives. Mine was out of office during my childhood. But I guess I did have a few interventions when near deaths and things like that. But they didn't protect me from the family predators, unfortunately. But in a roundabout way they did, because my mother took me on a cruise to Germany, and that got me away from him for quite some time. Anyway, We won't focus on that. We'll focus on the miraculous and the magical and the powerful and the beautiful, kind of how I've grown up, people of Earth. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more. Anyway, children do need more protection than adults. They are vulnerable, and as much as we try to protect them from all the bad things that might happen, there are always dangers and risks in the world. It seems that the angels may have a particular interest in protecting children. There are also plenty of reports of guardian angels in adult lives. There is no reason to believe that the angels look after adults any less carefully than children. This is true, people of Earth. Perhaps it is just that children are less rigid in their thinking and more likely to recognise an angel when they meet one. Sarah, 24, Michigan, USA. When I was young, about 4 or 5, my parents used to fight a lot. Well, I can resonate with that, can't I? Our apartment was very small, and they would be arguing either in their bedroom or in the kitchen, right outside my bedroom door. The door would be open a crack, as I was scared of the dark, so I would even be able to see them going to and fro sometimes. It was always late, about midnight or later, after they had been drinking, so I'd be awakened by the shouting. They used to say terrible things to each other. My mother would be saying how she wished she had never married him and how badly she wanted to leave, and he'd be telling her to just go then. There would be smashing sounds as well, glasses and plates being thrown, I don't know by whom, and sometimes screaming as they would even hit each other when it got really bad. That's one of my first memories, and unfortunately, it's a sad one. They split up eventually. I lived with my mother after that, and my father would see me at weekends. It was better because they didn't fight anymore, but I was sad that my father wasn't at home. When they were fighting, their voices sounded frightening. It was like someone horrible was pretending to be my parents, and they had the exact same voices, except they were so angry and kind of distorted, which I guess was down to the drinking. It scared me, and I used to lie there with the pillow over my head so I couldn't hear so well. I remember on several occasions that I felt a hand on my shoulder and my angel would be there. I would look up and dimly see her looking down at me in the dark room while they were still shouting in the other room. She would stay there while I lay back down and gently stroke my hair and shoulder until I went back to sleep. Often I would be awakened again later by my father, who used to come in to check that I was all right. He probably felt guilty about the noise and the things I'd been shouting. I used to tell him I'd been having a bad dream, which meant that he stayed to look after me for a while, but he'd still be tense and distracted. I liked it best when my angel looked after me because I knew that she understood. Ellie, 29, New York, USA. When I was about 4, I went to the zoo with my uncle and aunt. I used to love the monkeys. We went straight there when we arrived, and then we walked around the rest of the zoo. I couldn't understand why my uncle and aunt liked the aquarium so much, and while we were there, I got the idea that I should go back and see the monkeys. I wandered off in that direction, meaning to go quickly and then come back. But I got lost and took a wrong turn. I ended up somewhere near the big cats. It took me about 10 minutes to find my way back to the aquarium, and when I got there, they were gone. It's a terrible feeling when you get lost as a child. It didn't really occur to me that they would be looking for me. In fact, they were probably panicking themselves as they were in charge of me for the day. But I just started running frantically around looking for them. I thought that maybe I should run outside and go find the car where they had parked it. But I would have had to cross the road, and I wasn't allowed to do that by myself. Then a pretty lady stopped and asked if I was lost. I nodded and started crying. She took me by the hand and led me straight over toward the main buildings. There was an office or something there, and my uncle and aunt were standing outside looking worried. As I got there, the lady said, "There's your aunt and uncle." It was odd because I hadn't told her who I was looking for, but she recognized them immediately. Why did she know who they were? That might have been explained by her being someone they knew, but I didn't recognize. But then a year or 2 later, something similar happened. I was shopping with my mother in the city. It was a very busy department store. And while she was looking at some cushions, I wandered off to look at the toys. But then I couldn't find her again. Again a lady found me, took my hand, and helped me find my mother. It was the same lady. That's why it's so strange. The only 2 times in my life I got lost like that, the same woman rescued me and made sure I didn't get into any trouble. My mother was so angry at me at that time because she had been so scared that I guess I finally learned not to wander off, so I don't remember ever getting lost again. But I have a feeling that if I ever did really need her again, the lady would be there. Jason, Birmingham, England. I saw an angel in my bedroom when I was about 5 or 6 years old. I woke up from a nightmare in which I was being chased and attacked. Sorry, it's just so hot in this corner, it's odd. In which I was being chased and attacked by some giant bats. I was screaming and crying, and as I awoke, I saw this tall, beautiful man standing at the end of my bed. I didn't feel frightened of this man. He was so beautiful and seemed so gentle. I could see these huge shimmering wings behind him, and he looked to be about 9 feet tall. He held his arms out over me and said, "No harm can come to you." I immediately felt protected and loved. It was like being cuddled up in a really warm blanket on a cold, dark night. I will never forget that feeling or what I saw that night. People have tried to tell me that I was still dreaming, but I feel in my heart that it was real. There was an angel in my bedroom that night, letting me know that I was cared about. So I do believe in angels. I have seen one with my own eyes. Bernice, Leeds, England. When my eldest daughter was a baby, about 5 months old I think, I remember something very weird happening. I was a single mum then. My husband had walked out before the baby was even born. He wasn't the type of man who could cope with responsibilities. I was always worried sick about how I was going to make things work all on my own. On this particular day, I was cuddling and playing with my daughter as usual when I saw that something behind me had caught her eye. She had this huge, amused smile on her face, and I turned round, but there seemed to be nothing there. I looked back at her and made the little tickling noises she loved. As I was looking into her eyes, I could see my own reflection, but there also seemed to be something behind me, a very tall figure with the outline of what looked like wings. Again I turned round. Still couldn't see anything, although this time I felt that the world had been turned into a wonderful, loving space where my daughter and I would both be taken care of. After that day, things began to work out. I got a good job where they were very understanding about time off because I had such a young baby. I also met my current husband later the same year. We've been together 20 years now, and I have another child with him. I like to think that what I saw that day was my daughter's guardian angel, and that she's still being looked after wherever in the world she goes. Oh, bless. George, Kentucky, USA. When I was about 13 and my brother was 11, we went to stay with our aunt and uncle on their farm because our mother was about to give birth to our sister. They had a lot of livestock and it could be a noisy place. On top of that, their dog Herbert always slept on the floor of the spare bedroom where we were sleeping. and he snored badly because he was an old dog. I was finding it hard to fall asleep and could hear what I thought was thunder in the distance. Suddenly, the bedroom was lit up in this really bright light. At first, I thought it must be lightning, but it stayed too long to be that. I looked down at the end of my bed, and there was a really tall man standing there, looking at me and my brother and smiling fondly. The next morning, I said nothing about it and things carried on as normal. It wasn't until about 15 years later, when I was having a drink with my brother, that I brought the subject up. He said he had seen the same thing and had been keeping it quiet in case anyone would think he was crazy or laugh at him. We think it was some kind of angel telling us that we were being looked after and protected. Pardon me. Billy, Manchester, England. When I was a kid, we used to play in the old derelict mills along the canal. We swung out over the canal on the old ropes that we used to haul things into the loading bays from the barges on the canal. We always dared each other to let go of the rope as we swung and jumped onto the other side of the bank. Sometimes I'd feel brave enough to try it, and other times I wouldn't. One day, one of us lads fell into the canal. We knew he couldn't swim and we raced out of the mill to get over the bridge to the canal bank. We got to where he'd fallen in and he seemed to float through the water to the side so that we could pull him out. After we got him out, he said he actually felt as if someone was in the water escorting him to safety. He hadn't swum or floated, more been pulled along by an unseen force. An angel must have been looking out for him that day, or an ondine, a water nymph. Yes, I believe in those too. One stole my toe ring at Stradbroke Island. Probably caught it on a stick in the sand, but it felt like something twisted it and slipped it off. It was astonishing. Astonishing, I tell you. So I said an ondine stole my toe ring, and I went right out and bought another spoon and made another one, because I'll be damned if, I'm going to be deprived of my jewellery because of ondines. Wow, they got the one. That one had a little love heart on it that I'd especially handmade and hammered and textured. I'm still a bit upset that I lost it. It wasn't worth much. It didn't cost me much. And the work I'd put into it wasn't too laborious, but it's just a bit rude when mermaids steal your toe rings. Surely they've got their own treasure at the bottom of the sea. And as Jared wisely said, it was tribute. Indeed it was. Alison, London, England. I'm convinced I had a visit from an angel a few years ago. I was working as a teacher at a very tough local school. The job was so stressful that I became depressed, and gradually my condition worsened until I had what I suppose you'd call a breakdown. I was at home actually considering taking a bottle of pills. Don't bother, honey, it doesn't work. Shh. I shouldn't laugh, but I'm laughing at myself and my own. I mean, at the time it felt like the most logical and only thing I could possibly do to get out of that level of horror and pain, but now I know there's no point. Don't go there ever again. "15-year deaths. It's a lot, people of Earth. My psychiatrist told me yesterday he recognised it too. He said, "You're going through another metamorphosis, aren't you?" It's been a lot of metamorphosing in the last 12 months. It's been intense. But I said, "This is yet another breakdown, Brian." I'm like, "What the hell? I normally only have them 4 times a year. I think I've had 4 already and it's only April." He nodded. "We'll come out of it okay, Tanya," he said. "You're metamorphosing." He knows me very well. He knows when I come back from my breakdowns, I come back with superpowers. I don't know what they are, but I come back stronger and more powerful, more grounded and more sanguine than ever before. But this one's been a bit rough. And to be fair, it doesn't feel like it's all mine. I feel like it's someone I know who loves me deeply is going through something, and instead of communicating with me, I'm picking up the energy. So it's kind of painful. Anyway, just send prayers out that they're okay, and when they're ready to communicate with me, mano a mano, they will. And if not, not. Free will, people of Earth. Always and forever. Free will. Anyway, it really had gotten that bad that she was considering taking a bottle of pills. I felt my life was no longer worth living. Suddenly, the room was filled with the scent of roses, and I felt so calm and relaxed. I felt cared for, really. It was that kind of sensation. I went to bed that night, and the next day at school applied for 6 months' leave. During this time, I worked as a volunteer in an orphanage in Kigali. Don't even know where that is. Let's Google it, people of Earth. So some of these stories they leave out salient facts, which is kind of annoying, but I guess keeps them shorter. And I can Google where Kigali is. It's just a bit of extra homework, it won't kill me. Right. Capital of Rwanda. Right, didn't know that. Knew nothing about that. Right. The experience filled me with a sense of strength and capability. When I returned to London, I was a different person. I dealt with the stresses of teaching differently, and in that way, the experience changed my life. Emily, Amsterdam, Holland. I have been in a wheelchair since being hit by a car when I was 9 years old. That was 20 years ago, so I have become used to it. Whenever I go to our local grocery store, I always use the ramp and automatic doors at the side of the building so that I can get my wheelchair in. One particular day, I was heading for the ramp as usual when a woman came along the road and stopped me. She said, "Hello," and tried to engage me in conversation. I must confess, I was a bit rude to her because I wanted to get on with my shopping and get home. Just as I was about to make my excuses and leave, there was an enormous bang. We both looked round and the bus had crashed into the side of the grocery store building. The ramp had been almost demolished. I heard the woman saying, "See, you would have been there if it hadn't been for me." I turned around. She was already a long way down the road. I like to think that she was some kind of angel looking out for me. Indeed. Earth angels, they're not always ephemeral, that means short-lived. What's the word? I can't think of the word. Anyway, they're not always metaphysical, they often come in human form too, under instructions from some higher power, some gnosis in that moment. Tony, 33, Greenwich, England. Picking up a lot of energy, people of Earth. It's intense. One of the weirdest things about walking through a tunnel is that every horror film you have ever watched comes crashing into your head. I worked for a few months as an usher in a theatre in the West End, which meant I didn't finish until about 11 p.m. after I'd got on a train full of happy people who had all mysteriously vanished by the time I got to my stop. I had to walk through Greenwich Foot Tunnel on my own to get home. Every night I would hear my footsteps echoing through the tunnel and images of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the Evil Dead, and anything I'd ever seen with clowns in it would seem to be in every shadow or noise. I know to include clowns in that list is a bit odd, but I once saw a sketch at a circus that consisted of clowns pulling very large teeth out of each other, and I've never quite got over it. Anyway, with my hyperactive imagination and the fact that it was actually quite late and just a little bit eerie, I used to dread my journeys home. About the third time I did this supernatural walk through the tunnel, I noticed a guy walking just ahead of me. Not having a handy wooden stake, silver bullet, or whatever it is that's needed on this kind of occasion, I just walked a little slower. He seemed to slow his pace too, but not enough to make me want to curl up in a ball and start wanting my mother. So I kept walking. When I got to the end, he had gone back to his castle in Transylvania, I presumed. The next night, gritting my teeth once more against the horrors awaiting me, I noticed he was there again. I slowed, hoping he wouldn't notice the one other person in the entire tunnel with really loud shoes. By the time I got to the end of the tunnel, he had disappeared. This continued to happen night after night, until in the end I didn't slow my pace and started to look for him. He was always there, always guided me home, and always disappeared. When the job finished, I remember thinking how much I would miss the money, but also that I wouldn't see him again. A few months later, I'd been out with some girlfriends and was just slightly the worse for wear. I wandered in a not altogether straight line into the tunnel and decided to find him, but no matter how slowly I walked, he never appeared. I can't lie, I felt a bit let down. Then, just as I reached the mouth of the tunnel, I could see him leaning against the arch at the end. I felt so relieved that he hadn't left me to the werewolves that it took me until the next day to realise that, like my mother, my guardian angel didn't approve of drinking. I like that. He made us sweat, like, am I there? Am I not there? Sweet. Chrissy, 40, Colorado, USA. I was fascinated that my toddler seemed to know exactly what angels are. One day, my friend sent me a Christmas card. It had a lovely picture of an angel on it. It wasn't one of those really fancy ones with halos and angels. The wings were there, but were quite small. And the main thing was that it was a beautiful woman in white with light all around her. I showed it to Maddie, who was just 3, and said, "Look at the lovely angel." And he said, "Yes, she comes here sometimes, doesn't she?" I thought it was just one of those cute things kids say, but he kept on about it, saying that the angel came in the night and she was sometimes there when I wasn't. One incident really persuaded me that he might be telling the truth. I was in the kitchen and he was reaching for the bottles under the sink. I told him firmly that he mustn't play with them, and he knew this anyway. A few weeks before, I had left him alone for a moment in the kitchen to answer the telephone. And when I got back, he had somehow managed to get the top off the bleach. Maybe I hadn't put it back on properly, but I was quite scared. It was just sitting there beside him, open, and he could have drunk it or knocked it over or anything. I shouted at him and told him never to play with the bottles. At the time, he mumbled something about a lady. This time, when I scolded him about the bottles, he said that the angel had told him not to drink them. I asked if that was when I had scolded him about them before, and he said, yes, the angel told me not to, so I didn't. So I think maybe the angel had already saved him from doing anything stupid in the moments before I got back to him, because it's strange for him to take the top off and then just put it down. Toddlers are so inquisitive. If no one told him to stop, he would have just kept going and tried to see what else he could do with the bottle. Drink it, pour it out, or whatever came into his head. But instead, he just put it down safely upright and walked away. When they get to that age, they can be so difficult to look after. They're like little monkeys, the way they go around poking their faces into everything. I've often thought it's a miracle that Maddie never got hurt, but the more I think about it, the more I think we had a bit of help. Maddie's 5 now, and he doesn't talk about the angel anymore. But I hope she is still there if he ever needs her. I'll do my best to look after him so she doesn't need to help. But the terrifying thing with children is all the different dangerous things in the world they're going to come across. All you can do is pray that they are safe and hope that if you ever need it, you get some help. Matthew, Oban, Scotland. We used to play in the loch as boys, and often, see, I can pronounce loch, but I can't pronounce Oban. Oh, the irony. Oh, we've got some heavy weather coming back on again. Oh, dear goddess. And often we'd try to swim out as far as we could, floating and diving and daring each other to go deeper. One day, one of our friends, Donald, dived very deep and didn't resurface. We dived down to try and look for him, but the loch is very deep and we couldn't find him. We thought he must have drowned. We were crying and frightened and made our way back to shore to tell someone what had happened. Donald was sitting on the shore with an old fisherman who he said had taken him into his boat and brought him to shore. None of us in the water had seen any fishing boat nearby that day, and we never saw the old man in the area again. I think Donald was saved that day by a higher force, possibly an angel. Andy, 34, Helsinki, Finland. My first child was born 2 years ago, a girl called Elle. When she was a tiny baby, she slept in our room in a straw basket. I used to be terrified that she would stop breathing in the night. You hear frightening things about crib death, and she was so little and fragile, I just couldn't believe that she was strong enough. We were having trouble sleeping anyway, because she liked to be held when she was falling asleep, so one of us would have to hold her for a long time. Then, 3 or 4 hours later, she would be crying for milk, and my wife would have to get up. After a few weeks, we moved on to bottles of milk for the night, but even so, it was difficult. On top of this, every time I woke up, or just as I was about to fall asleep after being woken, I would panic that I couldn't hear her breathing. I would have to get up and go over to the basket and turn the light on so that I could see her little chest rising and falling. Then I would go back to sleep. We were getting exhausted, and my wife was getting infuriated that every time she fell asleep, she would be awakened either by the baby or by me fumbling in and out of bed so I could check on her. I knew it was a silly fear, but it became compulsive at one point. Then, one night, I fell asleep with the light on, and I woke as usual an hour or so later with my heart pounding, panicking that I had to check on Elle. I started to get up and looked across the room. There was an angel sitting in the chair next to Elle's basket. She was a young woman with a very kind face. She looked up and smiled at me and put a finger to her lips. Then she looked back down at Elle and just sat there. I realised she was letting me know that Elle was being looked after. I sank back and went back to sleep. I still worried about Elle, of course, but after that I realised I was only making things worse by worrying so, and I managed to get a bit more sleep. When you get through those first few months and start being allowed to sleep through the night again, it all turns into a bit of a blur. You are so tired all the time, you can't remember every detail. But at the same time, it is strange. It is a beautiful time because you have this amazing gift of a new little person. But it is also terrifying and physically very demanding. Indeed it is, by the gods. No one can go for long without a proper night's sleep, without starting to get run down and emotional. I knew raising a child was never going to be easy, but the angel helped at a moment when I was only making things more difficult for myself. I told my wife about it recently. At the time I didn't want to mention it, but then recently we were talking about that time and I told her about the angel. And do you know what she said? She just said, "Of course, I always knew she was there. I saw her the very first night in the hospital, looking down at Elle when she was asleep." If only she'd told me that at the time, maybe I would have slept better myself. Marjorie, 41, London, England. When I'm on my way home from work, I walk past a school. The road is always crowded with mums and a few dads waiting to pick up their kids. I finish work earlier than most people because I'm the office assistant for a local building firm and I have to start when the contractors come in. That means being at the office by 7:30 in the morning. I don't mind starting that early. I've never had a problem getting up in the morning, unlike my 2 teenage children. I'm glad it's my husband and not me who has to deal with hauling that pair out of bed. It also means that I always get a little bit of daylight at the end of the day, even in the winter, and that I'm home on my own for an hour or so before the house goes mad again. Anyway, normally when I pass the school, it's just before going home time and the kids are all still in their classrooms. But sometimes, if I've stayed a bit late or picked up some bread or milk from the shop, I go past when most of the parents have been and gone, and there's just a few kids left in the playground waiting for the late arrivals. There's always a few parents that don't quite get there on time. I did it myself when my kids were little. The car won't start or there's a phone call just as you're leaving or something. The school always leaves a teacher in charge until I accidentally touched the mouse pad and I freaked out and I cut us off, which is what often happens. Where were we? The school always leaves a teacher in charge until the last child has been collected, so it's perfectly safe. I'm a bit of a nosy old bag, so I usually have a look to see if it's the same kids being picked up late every time. And more often than not, that's what happens. Busy parents, I suppose, or just plain irresponsible. Recently, though, I've been looking much more closely because I started to become aware of some other figures in the playground who aren't kids or the teacher. The first time I saw them, I wasn't really paying attention, and I caught a glimpse of what I thought were older children, one with each of the little ones. And I thought that the school must be trying out some kind of scheme to keep the kids happy while they were waiting for their mums and dads to arrive. It was only when I got home that I remembered the school only teaches up to the age of 11. The people I'd seen had looked much bigger than that. So the next day, I deliberately, my crazy hair. So the next day I deliberately left work a bit late again. And when I passed the school, I stopped to have a closer look. The older kids were there again, one with each of the little ones. But I found it hard to get a good look at them or to make out their faces very well. It's not that it was getting dark or anything, it's just that I didn't seem able to be able to focus on them for any length of time. I also noticed that the little kids weren't aware of the older ones, perhaps because they never seemed to speak, even though they were never more than a couple of feet from the child they were looking after. And whenever a child's mum or dad arrived to take them home, the caretaker just disappeared. I never actually saw them vanish in a puff of smoke. They were simply there one minute and not the next. I've passed the school at that time on lots of occasions now, and the older ones are always there. I can see them a little more clearly now, pardon me, and there always appears to be a vague glow around them, a bit like the way street lights look in the winter when it's just getting dark, which is kind of a phosphorescence, isn't it? Interesting. I'm pretty sure that I'm able to see the children's guardian angels, making sure that they're safe until the parents turn up. I haven't ever taken anybody else to see this because I'm not sure that the angels would approve, and anyway, I don't think anyone else would be able to see them. I don't know why I can see them, but I feel very lucky to be allowed to. I always leave work that bit later now, just so I can see the angels. My boss thinks it's because I'm finally taking my job seriously. But what does he know? Allison, 18, Michigan, USA. My dad was in the army. He used to be away for a few months at a time on missions, but I'd be fine with my mother, and she'd tell me how my daddy loved me and how much he missed me. The one time I got really scared was when he went away to the first Gulf War after Iraq invaded Kuwait. I was just old enough to understand where he was going and that people get killed in wars. I started to get really scared in the middle of the night. I would wake up and stare at the ceiling and imagine terrible things. I'd seen horrible things on the news, and no matter what my mother said, I was terrified that I wasn't going to see him again, or that he was going to get hurt in some terrible way. My mother knew I was worried and upset, but I think she wasn't that happy herself at that stage, and it was difficult for us both. One night I woke up and started worrying again. I got up and went downstairs to get myself a glass of water, and there was a strange woman sitting at the kitchen table. She told me to sit down, and then she held my hand. She told me that my father was going to be fine and that he knew I was worrying about him. She said it was only natural for me to worry, but that I had to be brave for the sake of both my parents. Then she gave me a lovely hug and just held me there for a while. I slept much better after that. Next day I remembered what she had said, and I went up to my mother and gave her a hug too. I thought about how nice it had been for me and thought that maybe she needed a hug too. I told her that an angel had told me Daddy would be okay, and she just started crying and crying. I was quite shocked. I hadn't really realised how scared she was until then. After that, we probably supported each other a bit better, rather than tiptoeing around, trying to pretend everything was fine. My daddy was okay in the end, although he had a lucky escape when a rocket landed right next to his vehicle but didn't explode. When he got back, he said that the angels had been with him and that not everyone had been so lucky. I was glad when, in the end, he left the army and stayed home. Terry, 34, Worthing, England. I'm a cab driver and I work nights, which means that I end up doing a lot of trips to the airport in the early mornings after all the fares from late night clubs have dried up. Where I live, the trains don't get started until about 6 in the morning, but the first flights for business and for holidays take off at about the same time. As it happens, I like driving at that time of the day because the roads are pretty clear and there aren't as many crazy people out there. It's around 40 miles to the airport and then, of course, 40 miles back. When I've come into work at 8 or 9 at night, which is a normal shift for me, I often finish by doing those last 40 miles after I've been in the driver's seat for 10 or 12 hours, and I'm exhausted. It's easy to lose a bit of concentration or just drift into your own thoughts when you're cruising along at 70 miles an hour, and obviously that's not a good idea where you're in control of a ton of metal. One time, I think I might have fallen asleep for a few seconds. All I know is that I was suddenly speeding along the hard shoulder of the motorway and knocking over 2 or 3 traffic cones that were lined up on the side of the road. It was truly frightening. I stopped to try and get myself back together, and I can clearly remember wishing with all my might that I had someone friendly in the passenger seat to keep me company on those sorts of trips. The next time I did one, a few days later, I took a couple who were on their way to Spain for a couple of weeks. They were half asleep. Their flight was at 6:15, but they gave me a nice tip and woke up a bit when we reached the airport. They were obviously excited at the thought of their holiday and, to be quite honest, I was a bit jealous. I drove out of departures and got back onto the motorway for the journey home. About halfway back, I was starting to get tired again when a voice from the passenger seat said, "Terry, you should stop for a bit, get a cup of coffee." As you can imagine, I was a bit alarmed. It certainly woke me up. I looked across. There was a man in the seat staring straight ahead out of the windscreen. He looked a bit like my Uncle Joe, who runs a trucking company in Brighton, but it was hard to tell because I was trying to keep my eyes on the road. In fact, it was hard to make him out at all, and I started to worry that I actually had fallen asleep and was dreaming all this. I pulled over and the man said, "Not here, mate. You should find some coffee." I'm not sure what I said, but I knew he was right. So I drove another mile down the road to a service station. When I'd stopped the car again, I looked at him and asked who he was. He turned his head to me, and I noticed that even though he still reminded me of Joe, I kind of stopped registering his face because he had the most piercing, clear, grey eyes I had ever seen. He said, "I'm here to keep you safe, Terry." I believed that he was. I'd never had any truck with people who went to mediums or did any of that spiritualist stuff before, but here it was, happening to me. I think I wished for an angel that time when I'd nearly killed myself, and one came along, took pity on me and sat in the car with me for the long drive home. He stayed all the way back, but he was gone by the time I'd gotten out of the car outside my house and went around to the passenger door to see if he was real. He's joined me quite a few times since then, and he never says much, but he likes some of the music I listen to on the local oldies station. I thought for a bit I might be going mad, but I told my girlfriend about him, and she said that I should be grateful for any help I could get. She said he sounded like a nice guy, and when I said that I thought he was some kind of angel, she said that she thought he probably was. Mary, Australia. My husband left me when I was pregnant with our second child. Things had been bad between us, and I knew he'd had an affair. Stupidly, I thought that when I got pregnant it would make things better, but it actually made them worse. Dear Goddess. He wanted me to get rid of it, which is something I could never do. Then he got angry and started accusing me of trying to trap him, and all this terrible stuff came out. In the end he went off with the other woman, the one he'd had the affair with. I was left on my own. I had my mother and sister living close by, so they helped all they could, but I was dreading the future. I'd been quite depressed after John, my eldest son, was born. It probably didn't help our marriage because my husband was no use at all. He just thought I ought to be able to cope single-handedly with it all, and got angry if I started crying or telling him how bad I felt. I'd finally gotten over it, but now I knew I had to go through it all again, and this time I really would be on my own. I had no idea how I would cope with John and with a daughter. I'd had the scans and knew it was a baby girl that was due. About a month before the due date, I was cleaning the kitchen and John was playing out in the garden. I was once again fretting about how I was going to cope with him. I looked out and saw that there was a woman following him around. She was sitting in the swing chair, watching him, and then, when he went over toward the gate that led out to the road, she would go over and stand in front of it. He didn't seem to know she was there. He would have been 3 at that point, full of energy and new ideas, and a real handful. But this patient woman was just calmly following him round, making sure he didn't get into any trouble. She looked up and smiled straight at me. A lovely, warm smile. I went out to see who she was and to say hello, but when I got outside, she wasn't there. Or if she was still there, she was invisible. I realised that she had been letting me know that I wouldn't be on my own after all, that she would be there to help with John. I felt a bit silly, but I stood there in the garden thanking her and talking to her about how worried I'd been. And even though I couldn't see her, I was sure she understood. My waters broke that night, and my mother had to come and look after John while I went to the hospital. Kim was born at about noon, a beautiful little girl. After I got home, I did feel a bit down at times, but any time things got too hard, I used to talk to John's angel and tell her about it. I never saw her again, but knowing she was there helped more than I can possibly say. Adrian, 34, Bournemouth, England. When I was 8, I flew to Italy on my own. It sounds strange, but I was going to see my grandmother and aunts and uncles over there. My mother and father took me to the airport and made sure I got there safely. All the cabin crew knew I was on my own and helped out. Before I got on the plane, I was fine, and even when I sat down, I wasn't scared. All the attendants kept coming and checking if I was all right, and I kept saying yes. I'd flown before, as we had been on holiday in Europe a few times, so I thought I'd be okay. But then, when we started taking off, I started to get scared. There's that moment when the plane starts going faster and faster, and without my mum or dad there to explain what was happening, I started worrying about, what was going on. Then, after we got up in the air, there were some sharp banks and turns that felt very alarming. I started to get more and more upset, but I didn't want to make a fuss and ask for any help. So I just sat there in my seat. It got worse. About half an hour into the flight, when the captain asked us all to put our seatbelts on because there was some turbulence coming up. I had never experienced turbulence before, and I was terrified. I thought it meant that we might crash. I'd seen disaster movies, so I knew planes could crash. The attendants did check on me, but they were pretty busy going round making sure everyone was okay. Then a man came and sat down next to me. He made sure my seatbelt was fastened and did his own up. He asked if I was scared, and I said, yes, a little bit. He started to explain to me about turbulence and what was going to happen. He said the plane would suddenly drop, and then it would be a bit like being on a roller coaster. He asked if I'd been to the fairground and gone on the rides. I said yes, and he explained that it would feel a bit like that, a bit alarming, but basically safe. He told me that turbulence couldn't really hurt you on an aeroplane so long as you were belted in safely, and that really was kind of fun. Then the turbulence started, and it was quite bad. There were a few quite bad drops, and you wouldn't have been able to walk around. But now that the man had explained to me what was happening, I was much less scared. He kept telling me when there was about to be another big one, and it ended up being almost fun. Eventually it was over, and he went back to sit in his own seat. Sorry, I just had Spirit tell me to say the most outrageous thing to someone, and I'm laughing because it's just so childish and petty and ridiculous and also desperate. I'm not going to do it, but it's odd, people of Earth. It's odd how these things race through my mind in the middle of my stories. Anyway, it's my angels jerking my chain as they do. They like to... I have a strange relationship with my angels. They like to stir me up a fair bit. Sometimes it can be a bit upsetting, if truth be known, but ultimately they have my back. But boy, do they mess with my mind sometimes. You have to laugh. But I know I'm loved, and by the people that genuinely love me. I don't need to worry, actually. I'll just let things be and not listen to that little trickster spirit. Ooh, that was mischievous what they just said. I can't share it with you because on the basis it would be incriminating, but it's just comical, actually. Very comical. Anyway. No, stop that now. It's not appropriate. Anyway, you have to laugh. Eventually it was over. Let's resume being professional people. Who's that? All these strange cars going around my little side street today, and it's unusual because there's only a few houses on that street. Sometimes I wonder why there's so many cars and who's coming and going, but it's not my monkey, it's not my circus, so I mind my own business usually, but it's a bit odd. Sometimes it's a bit trippy. More cars coming and going than people live in the street. Anyway, it's probably people that have gone up to the dog park. Let's resume the story. Eventually it was over, and he went back to sit in his own seat. I was fine for the rest of the journey. When we got to Rome and landed, I thought I ought to tell him thank you for helping. I was at the front of the plane, so I was first or second off. I waited there for the man to come past so I could thank him, but no one who looked anything like him got off. I waited right till the end, but he definitely wasn't there. Whoever it was very kind of him to help me, because I would have had a terrible time otherwise. Molly, 73. London, England. I grew up in London during the Blitz. I lived in Stoke Newington, Dalston, not too far from the East End, which was a major target for the bombers. It was an interesting, that would have been my Auntie Sylvia's childhood too, because she grew up in the East End of London. I think she said she was sent away though to the country, the worst of it. They did that during the war. Anyway, I think she did, if I remember correctly. It was an interesting time to grow up. Of course, the adults found it very frightening, but as a child it was like all the rules were suspended. You didn't really understand that that wasn't normal life, and no matter how much of a cliche it is, everyone did look out for each other. There was a great spirit, unlike modern times, by the gods. Tying box trailers opposite my house, leaving me for dead. Bastards. No, I'm not over it yet. Probably never get over that. Even my psychiatrist said to me yesterday, it's quite understandable that you're going through a metamorphosis, Tanya. Your mood's been a bit erratic and you felt a bit depressed and a bit triggered because, like, that was really an unpleasant experience and you had to fight through that on your own, as per bloody usual. And, you know, as you get older, it gets a bit harder and harder to fight on your own. Anyway, it's all good. I got through it and I'm all right, actually. But even he said, that was a scary thing. It's okay for you to feel a bit vulnerable now. Indeed, he's a wonderful man. He really is a wonderful human being. I have very wonderful human beings in my team, don't I? Some of you watch my videos. Some of you wonder what I'm going on about too. Some of you love me no matter what, even when I get a bit cray-cray and talk to discarnate entities that stir me up occasionally. Don't even know who that was. Don't think it was Davidson for a change. He was the chief trickster spirit of them all. But anyway, I'm not bothered. I'm not bothered in the slightest. They want me to be passionate and act out, show the full force of my love. But if I did that, I'd just come across as crazy and I'd lose a beautiful friendship. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to rise above things and be dignified. And what will be is what will be. I was evacuated, but I had a terrible time with the family I was sent to stay with. I hated the countryside and they treated me quite badly. I ran away and came back to London. That was brave, wasn't it, for a child to run away during the war in England, from the country back to London alone? On the train back to London, there was a man who sat opposite me. He knew that I was an evacuee going back to town. I thought it must be obvious. He talked to me all the way back, and at Paddington, he took me to a taxi and made sure that the taxi driver knew where to take me. It seemed very kind of him, but people did a lot of kind things for strangers in those days. Indeed. Better stock in those days. Much finer, braver, more honourable stock. Not like the pissweak generation. Box trailers. My family wasn't very pleased to see me. It wasn't that they didn't like me or anything, but I was just one more thing for them to worry about. They wanted me to go back, but I refused. so they set about trying to find a new place for me to go. I think there's a bit more in that story she's not telling us, for obvious reasons. Not everyone can speak out about that kind of trauma. But it explains why she ran away and didn't want to go back. Just saying, read between the lines sometimes, people of Earth. A lot can be said by what's not said at all. They arranged for me to stay with some distant cousins, but they couldn't take me for a couple of weeks. A few days later, I was out playing in the street when I saw a man with a horse pulling a cart. I loved horses, so I followed after it. I knew my way around pretty well, but I wasn't really concentrating, and I got lost a few streets away from home. I stopped following the horse, set off back home, but went the wrong way and ended up somewhere over near Shoreditch, a long way from home. That's when the sirens went off for a bomb raid. They didn't usually come in the afternoon, but for some reason they did that day. I was really scared, not knowing how to get home fast enough to get into the shelter in the garden with my father. Then a man stopped to help me. It was the same man who had been on the train by some strange coincidence. He was a dark-haired man, very tall, with blue eyes, in a dark suit. He took me up to one of the nearest houses and asked them to look after me. They were a nice family and were quite happy to look after a 9-year-old. The man told me not to worry about my family. He'd let them know. He didn't know me, but he said that anyway. Meanwhile, my dad was going mad looking for me. He was running up and down the street where we lived, trying to see where I'd gotten to. It was long after the time when he should have gotten to the shelter, but he didn't want to go in until he found me, a real man, unlike my useless parents. Dear goddess. Anyway, he would have never forgiven himself if I had gotten hurt or killed. A man came and told him I was all right in the shelter and that he should get inside. He told me later it was a tall man with dark hair and blue eyes. It sounded very much like the man who had helped me, but it was so far away. He couldn't possibly have helped me and then got to my dad in time. My dad went into the shelter, still worried about me, but hoping what the man had said was right. He asked the man if he would come in too, but he just said he would be fine and walked off down the street in the middle of an air raid. About 5 minutes later, a huge bomb landed on our street. It didn't hit our house, but it fell in the middle of the road, making a massive crater and blowing out all the windows. One house was damaged too badly and had to be knocked down. My dad would have been killed if he'd still been out there. I think the man was an angel, that his main aim was to save my dad because my dad would have taken a chance and stayed out there otherwise. As it was, he was badly shaken. I was taken home by the mother of the family I stayed with after the all clear, and he was shouting at me and crying with relief at the same time. It was only later that he told me about the man who had saved him, and I worked out that it was the same man who had helped me on 2 separate occasions. I went to stay with the cousins in the end, and it was fine. We were lucky not to lose anyone in our family in the Blitz, but I knew plenty of people who weren't so lucky. Hank, Oregon, USA. It's 2 weird guys, both dressed in very smartly in suits. That's about the 3rd time I've seen them walk up and down the street. They're probably real estate agents. They've got that kind of aura about them. As long as they don't annoy me, I don't care. It's odd though, because they're just walking up and down, chatting. One's looking on his phone. One's wearing a brown suit and one's wearing a navy blue suit. Odd. It's a bit odd, people are there. But there's no crying and walking up and down the street for the love of all the gods. Hank, Oregon, USA. Once I was driving my truck down a country road near where I live. I was going at a reasonable speed and coming up toward a long curve when I saw a car coming up fast behind me. It was some guy in too much of a hurry who kept trying to pull out and get a look so he could pass me. The view ahead was not good because it was summer and there were trees to either side. But this guy was in too much of a hurry, to wait until a safer place. He just hit his horn to let me know he was coming and set off. I was shaking my head and slowing down a bit when I looked back at the road ahead. Saw a kid coming out from a path on the left-hand side, looking the opposite way down the road. He was looking for cars coming the other way, but apparently it didn't occur to him to check back in our direction. The guy overtaking me saw him too and started braking. But there wasn't enough space for him to stop. He was right beside my big truck on a narrow curve, so there was no space for him to swerve around the kid. It was like watching something horrible in slow motion. The car was heading straight for this kid, and only at that moment did he start to turn his head and look around at us. At that moment, I saw something bizarre. The kid jolted in the air, twisted, and fell back toward the side of the road. The only way of describing it is to say that it was like someone invisible pushed him. He didn't jump, but his feet left the ground and he was thrown to the grass beside the road. The overtaking car only just missed him, but at least it did miss him. I was already braking, so I slowed down and stopped. The guy in the passing car just sped up and drove away, which I thought was shameful. I ran back to make sure the kid was okay. He was just standing there, staring down the road. I asked him what happened and it seemed like he had no idea, but he knew he had a lucky escape. He was about 12 and at the speed that guy was going, he easily could have been killed. Lionel, Cornwall, England. I come from a fishing family, and there are plenty of stories about angels. It's said that an angel came to my great-grandfather when he was out in the boat, and because of that, he knew to hurry home. His wife nearly died in childbirth, and if he hadn't got home to get help, she almost certainly wouldn't have made it. You sometimes see angels above a boat in a very bad storm. My father used to tell me not to look at them. He thought it was bad luck to see them, as they might be coming to take you if you died. Here's those two men again. How did they sneak round this road? Okay, that's a bit freaky. They're not angels, they're just human men, but that's odd. Because how did they get back down here and then come round again without me seeing them? You can't loop around, at the top to get back down the street. Odd. Very odd. I should get out and follow them, shouldn't I? What you doing, gentlemen? Looking a bit sus in the neighbourhood. But no. I'm reading my stories to YouTube and I'm not that bothered. But yeah, so, because didn't I say that these guys, they look like real estate agents, suddenly they're right here going past my house again. I wonder if I should actually report it just in case they're casing the place. But casing the place in very nice suits is a bit unusual, but put you off being suspicious. You'd assume they're real estate agents. I'm just going to stand up to see where they've gone to now. Turn into one of those busybody little old ladies. Is that them driving that Mercedes ute? No. How bizarre. They seem to disappear really quickly too. It'd be funny if while I'm reading you a story about angels, I've got weird ass angels pacing up and down the street. I think that might be them that's driven off now. Maybe. How bizarre. How bizarre. Anyway, where were they? The father was worried that if you saw an angel, it meant they were coming to take you if you died, which does sometimes happen, but usually only under really kind of fraught circumstances, like the little boys that died out the front of my house. They were greeted by angels. But anyway. But I always thought, how could it be bad luck to see an angel? And I used to look out for them. Several times in a really bad storm, as we were trying to keep the vessel under control, I've looked up through the driving wind and rain and through the spray of the waves and seen two angels in the rigging. They weren't holding on to anything, just hovering there. They weren't easy to see. It's hard to see anything in a real storm. But I could see the light from their bodies, and occasionally I could catch a glimpse of their faces. Didn't look for too long though. My father would be right about it being bad luck if you let yourself get distracted. You've got to keep your wits about you to survive out there in the bad storms. Indeed. Don't mention the box trailers strapped to power poles, people of Earth. Thankfully, I've never been hurt or had a boat go down. If I have the angels to thank for that, then I am very grateful. Mary, 62, and now we've got the mist and the rain. This feels like English weather right now. I even said that to Marilyn up the road on Opal Street. She just smiled. We're so blessed we don't have that constant grey, misty, cold rain, constant like they have in England and Scotland and Wales. Oh, anyway. Mary, 62, Massachusetts, USA. I grew up with a lot of cold and rain and fog too, living across the road from the sea. We had fishing boats that used to go out. The whole fishing fleet was operated by descendants of Sicilian fishermen that had come out to Island Bay, Wellington, and to this day they're probably still operated by the Sicilian families. I don't know, but pretty sure they would be. Gets handed down, from generation to generation. I woke up many a night in the middle of the night hearing the foghorns as they were warning each other out in the bay. Sometimes it was almost a comforting sound actually. Other times it was lonely, a bit chilly. Guess it depends on your mood or what was going on in the home at that time. Anyway, Mary says, I used to feel bad about leaving my mother alone when she was ill. She was very frail, and sometimes when I was working, she had to cope at her house by herself. My father had died a few years earlier. She had to get up and down the stairs even to use the toilet and make a hot drink. She wasn't too ill to do that, but it tired her out, especially in the winter when everything seems a bit harder. So she spent a lot of time in her bedroom, sitting up in bed, reading or watching this little portable television I bought for her. But my mother had a few friends who came round to help. She lived in a different neighbourhood than me and had made new friends there, some of whom I hadn't met. I was glad about that, as it made me feel less guilty about not being able to do more. I used to get there in the evening and ask what she'd been doing, and often she would say, It's fine, Elsa's been here all afternoon, sitting in the chair. We've been talking. I never met Elsa, but she always seemed to come round when no one else could make it and sit with my mother in the afternoon. Later on, my mother fell and broke her hip and had to go into the hospital. I took as much time off work as possible to visit, but again, it was always Elsa who'd been to visit her earlier in the day, who had been talking with her. Once I talked to the nurse, and she said that no one had been to visit my mother all day, even though my mother had said that Elsa had been there. I was actually angry because I thought my mother was patronising me, making up a visit so that I wouldn't feel like I was being neglected. But she just kind of laughed and said, Sorry, I never explained, but Elsa's an angel. She looks after me. I really didn't know what to say. I didn't want to argue, and my mother looked so serene when she explained this that I felt like no matter what the truth of it was something I shouldn't interfere with. Right up until she died a few years later, she would go on mentioning Elsa, and I never argued about it. Then when she died and I had to organise the funeral, I had to ask all her friends if they knew Elsa so I could ask her to the funeral, and none of them had even heard the name. There didn't seem to be a real person of that name. The more I thought about it over the years, the more convinced I've become that my mother was telling the truth. Gareth, 55, New Hampshire, USA. Whenever I have some time off work and on the weekends, I like to go hiking in the woods. There's lots of places near my home where you can get into the woods, and I normally don't have to drive for more than an hour or so before finding a track or a dirt road that I can wander along for a few hours and forget about work and money and all the other little daily worries. Those walks are what keep me sane, I think. The only trouble is that I'm not very good with directions, and so I have a tendency to get lost with alarming regularity. Nowadays, my wife tries to make me take my cell phone with me, but I don't like the idea that anybody could just call me up in the middle of the wilderness, especially my mother. She's got a good heart, and she's getting older now, but she can talk forever about nothing. So I generally leave the phone in the car. That way I've taken it and my wife's happy that I don't have to answer it. Most of the times when I've gotten lost, it wouldn't do me any good anyhow. If you don't know where you are, how can you call someone and ask the way back? Usually I just blunder around for a while and end up back on a bit of pathway that I recognise, or I see some houses or something, and then I'm okay. A few times, however, I've started to get really worried, often when it's getting near dark, and I can't figure out where I am or how I'm going to get out of the trees, and that's when I've been guided by what I like to think is an angel. He doesn't look like you might imagine an angel to look. He looks more like me. He's got hiking boots and a small haversack, and he wears a bright red jacket, although I prefer yellow myself. I always see him when I'm just about reaching the end of my tether and have been trying to work out the way back to the car for at least an hour. Rather annoyingly, I've never been able to speak to him. He appears about 100 yards from where I am and waves to me to come his way, but when I get to where he was, he's another 100 yards away, waving again. This always continues, him waving and disappearing and me following, until I suddenly stumble on my car. The first time it happened, it was late October, freezing cold, and by the time I'd reached the car, nearly dark. I'd been very scared that I was going to end up stuck out in the woods all night and die of exposure. I was so grateful to my mysterious rescuer that I got even colder trying to find him to thank him. I looked all over the place where my car was parked, but there were no houses or other vehicles around, and there was absolutely no sign of him. The second time it happened was in midsummer, but I was no less frightened. I'm not an experienced woodsman and find the idea of snakes and animals scary. He appeared again, led me to safety, and then, once again, was nowhere to be found. I thought it must be an extremely odd coincidence that time, but when it happened for a third time, I began to wonder what this was all about. Since then, he's arrived every time I've gotten myself lost, about 10 or 12 times in all. He's always gotten me out of trouble. I believe that he's some kind of angel of the woods who comes to the rescue of the directionally challenged. I don't think it's just me that he helps. I think he's there for anybody who's not sure where they are and are a little bit worried about it. Perhaps he's one of the mountain men that first explored this area, who's carrying on with what he used to do and guiding innocents through the forest. I don't know. I do know that if it weren't for him, I would surely have spent at least one cold and lonely night on my own in the woods by now. So to me at least, he's an angel who watches out for the unwary, or in my case at least, the foolish. Angus, 32, New Jersey, USA. Starting to get quite tired, but there's only, well, I'll push through it, baby. There's only about 5 or 6 pages. I was going away on a business trip, and for the first time since our daughter Helena had been born, my wife was coming with me. My mother was looking after Helena. She knew her well, and we were staying at our home, so I knew it was all going to be fine. But, on the other hand, my wife and I were flying together, and we were both scared because we thought that if something did happen to the airplane, our daughter would be an orphan. This was a very upsetting thought, of course. The week before, at my mother's suggestion, I had written a will, and, as part of it, I had written a letter to Helena to be opened in the event that we died, and to be shown to her when she was old enough to understand. Of course, it is impossible to say everything you want to in a letter like that, but I wrote a few pages telling her how much we had loved her and how happy I was to have her in my life. I also wrote that I would be proud of her no matter what she chose to do, so long as she was true to herself. It was very strange writing a letter like that, because I was forced to put myself in a position where it came true, and my daughter, aged 8 or 10, was reading a letter from her father who had died. I wept a few tears while I was writing it, not of self-pity or pure sentimentality, but just because it brought home to me how enormous the family bond is, and how my life had been transformed by the change from being married couple to being a family. As we drove off, my mother came out to the front stoop with Helena, and they waved goodbye to us. Behind them, in the hall, I could see a white figure, a man or woman, watching them calmly as they waved to us. I knew for certain that there was no one in the house, so I immediately thought that it must be an angel, and it made me so happy to think there was an angel watching out for them. Of course the trip was fine and nothing went wrong, but it was an interesting and revelatory experience nonetheless. There were 2 other times I saw evidence of angels. Once I bought an old Polaroid camera as a toy and took pictures of my family. In 2 of them, as the image started to form, I could clearly see the figure of a woman standing behind Helena. It was very distinct, and I shouted for my wife, but as the picture set, the figure faded both times, leaving only Helena. It drove my wife crazy, but I'm sure I saw something. The last time was when Helena was not much older, about 5, and we went on holiday to Mexico. The airport was very busy when we arrived and we were all tired from the flight. Then we found out we had to wait for a coach to transfer us to the hotel and that it might be an hour's wait. This was the last straw for Helena, who started crying and having a tantrum. She'd mostly outgrown tantrums, but occasionally they came back at times like these. I was trying to calm her down. She just sat down a little distance away, still crying. At that moment, I saw that another family who were walking toward us with a luggage cart were headed toward her. The wheel of the cart was going to roll straight over her hand. She didn't see it coming, and it was a huge heavy cart laden down with suitcases, and I could see that the man pushing it hadn't seen that he was about to crush Helena's hand. I was watching this as though it was in slow motion, too far away to get there in time. Then, at the very last minute, Helena's hand was snatched away. I say snatched for good reason. It jerked as though it was out of her control, and she looked as surprised as me that her outstretched arm had moved. The cart passed by and missed her by a fraction. The man saw what he had nearly done and apologized profusely. I was just relieved that Helena was all right and extremely grateful to the invisible hand that had intervened to help her. I tend to think that it would be the same invisible hand that helped look after her the first time we went away, and probably countless other times I can't even guess about. Jacques, Lyon, France. I was driving home along the highway at about 7 p.m. one evening when I came across a roadblock and had to divert off the highway for a while before I could get back on it. I finally got back on the highway past the blockage and carried on home. I got home about 7:35 p.m. My wife greeted me with such relief that I thought something must have happened. She said there had been a huge accident on the highway, causing a massive pile-up. Many people had been killed. I later found out that the accident had happened at around 7:05 p.m, but the roadblock had not been put in place until around 7:25 p.m. I can't explain it. My wife thinks angels guided me home to her that night. What we're both sure about is the times at which these things happened. I was definitely home at 7:30 p.m. Melanie, Sydney, Australia. My first husband was a very aggressive and violent man. Often I would go to bed and leave him drinking downstairs. I would lie awake worrying that when he'd finished drinking he'd come upstairs, take all his anger out on me. On this particular night, I woke up to find a very tall woman standing at the foot of my bed. She had the whitest blonde hair I had ever seen and seemed to be about 7 feet tall. Her dress seemed to sparkle in this really dazzling way. Before I had fallen asleep, I had prayed that my husband would not treat me violently. Now this woman seemed to be holding her arms over my head and willing kind thoughts upon me. The whole room was lit with peace, and I knew that I would be able to sleep safely that night. Eventually, I gathered up the courage to leave that husband. I think it was first seeing the angel in our bedroom that made me able to think about standing on my own 2 feet. It felt as if the angel was saying, I will protect you tonight, but you can do this on your own. I could, and I did. Go, sister. Keith, 40, Birmingham, England. My wife sees angels when she sleepwalks. It is quite unsettling. She is a terrible one for sleepwalking. I'll often wake up to find her blundering around the room, looking like she's awake, but actually completely asleep and a bit confused. She will be trying to open an imaginary door in the wall, and once I caught her trying to open the window. When I asked her what she was doing, she said she was going to the sales. One thing that amazes me is that she never hurts herself. You would think she might fall over or hit her head or something, and that scares me. But somehow, she always seems to be all right. I found her asleep in all sorts of strange places in the house after sleepwalking. Often, while she is sleepwalking, she says things. Sometimes it is meaningless, but I've noticed that she often seems to be seeing angels. One time she told me not to sit on the chair because the angel was sitting there. Another time she kept telling me to look at the angels and saying how beautiful they were. She doesn't remember any of this when she wakes up, so I can't ask her to tell me what they look like. One time she was asleep at the top of the stairs, and I asked her what she was doing there. She was still half asleep and said that the angel had stopped her from going down the stairs. Once I even found her in the car, but thankfully she didn't have the keys, so she hadn't managed to start it up. My daughter Jasmine did that one time. She was only tiny, 3 or 4, can't remember if she was 3 or 4, but she was only a toddler. Got in my husband's, what was it, some kind of Holden station wagon, can't remember the model. It was an automatic. Somehow she started it up and it rolled down out our driveway and into the road. Oh, did I freak out. I ran out there like Bruce Lightning, and fortunately there was no cars coming, everything was safe, but we had to make sure she didn't get into the car on her own after that, the little blighter. She said that the angel had taken the keys off her, and the keys had indeed been moved from the hook over the door and put on top of the fridge, so something had happened. The last time she was sleepwalking, I woke up and found her in the front room talking to someone I couldn't see. I asked her who she was talking to. She said the angels had brought Ellie to see her. Now Ellie was a friend of hers who died 10 years ago in a car crash. My wife misses her very much. These things could all just be my wife's imagination or dreams. But I found the thing with the car keys unsettling because it seemed like what she was saying might actually be true. To be honest, I don't know what to think, but it is all fascinating. It does tend to make me think that the angels are there to look after her when she is at risk. Carl, Hawaii, USA. I was out scuba diving with some friends last year when one of our friends, Rob, hurt his leg badly on something under the water. We tried to help him, but he seemed to be sucked back under the water. We looked around for him for about 10 or 15 minutes, but we'd lost sight of him. It was a desperate and terrifying moment for us. We decided to head back to shore in our boat and report it to the Coast Authority. When we got back to the beach, Rob was sitting on the sand having his leg attended to by a medical attendant. When we asked him what had happened, he said he remembered being picked up by a man in a small dinghy and brought back to shore. We felt fairly sure there had been no other boats around that afternoon. I don't know how Rob was helped, but maybe it was some kind of angel who arrived in his hour of need. Eric, 72, Manchester, England. You just see. Right. 4 pages. I saw an angel this winter. I was ill with pneumonia. They call it the old person's friend because if you're too frail, it's not such a bad way to die. It takes a lot of people in the winter. I was at home being looked after by my daughter Alice. She'd been sitting with me in the evening and she was sleeping downstairs in the front room because I'd been so ill she was worried about me. I was lying on my back and feeling bad. I really needed to sleep and I was struggling to breathe because my lungs were so congested. I noticed I had the urge to breathe deeply just then because I know the feeling, babies. 2 years 2 years being left to suffer like that. It's amazing I'm alive at all, by the way. The COVID epoch, where they left you without proper bloody medical treatment. By the gods. And that was just for my normal bronchitis and asthma. So I'm not paranoid when I get convinced from time to time that the authorities were literally trying to kill me. Not just that, but the bad behaviour when I went for that colonoscopy too. Oh, it was really utterly terrifying. And no one backed me up except for the security guard when I said, "Kamate, kamate, kaoru, kaoru. It is death, it is death. It is life, it is life." And he nodded. "So you feel me?" "Yes," he said, "I feel you." And after that everything went quite swimmingly because that man, Mori, recognised my warrior spirit and had my back. But that was an evil, evil day. QE2 hospital. And then they threw out my medical file as well. My entire patient file. It's how malicious and how negligent they've probably been with my treatment over many years, up to and including, the hysterectomy and bladder repair. Oh, did they have a lot to fucking hide, the evil, dirty bastards. Including, while I was in recovery from that serious operation, sexual harassment from a male nurse. Oh, you're not safe to be vulnerable in our public hospital. Well, specifically, I'm not safe to be vulnerable in our public hospitals. Except recently the Mater promised me that they would look after me if I ever became frail and vulnerable and ill. I was promised that. But then, that was one nurse. Can I trust the rest of them, I wonder? Anyway, it's been great motivation to get myself as strong and as healthy as I possibly can, even with my, constant bladder issues, because I cannot end up in hospital ever again for any extended period of time. It's life-threatening for me, triggering and life-threatening. That's my reality and my truth, by the way. Not exaggerating, not in the slightest. Even getting that cyst cut out, that young doctor acted like she was terrified of me and was acting a bit odd. But I just put it down to they're overworked and stressed, and I wasn't rude. Just sat there quietly waiting for her to do the job, but they were cagey with me too. Odd. It's very odd, people of Earth. But anyway. Eric72 keeps saying, I was lying on my back and feeling bad. I really needed to sleep and I was struggling to breathe because my lungs were so congested. I started falling asleep and at the same time I could feel my heart fluttering and jumping. Then I saw the angel. He was quite faint, but I could see him clearly standing beside the bed. He was just watching, though he looked concerned. It was like the look people give you in the hospital when they're not sure what to say. It was a real struggle, but I made myself sit up and shout for Alice. Then I fell down on the bed. It turned out I'd had a little stroke, Nothing really serious, and then I got over it. I might have more strokes in the future, but don't worry, I'll be around for a while yet. Soldier on, Eric. Never let the bastards grind you down. James, Arran, Scotland. And I know how to pronounce Arran because they make the most beautiful Arran knitted, cable stitch, beautiful knitting in Arran, Scotland. We had a bad blizzard. We had a bad blizzard a couple of winters ago. There was a very heavy snowfall and strong winds. Part of the tiling on our roof came off overnight, and the next morning I set about trying to mend it, despite the weather, because it would be letting water into the house. I was up the ladder when it started to feel as if someone was shaking it at the bottom. I couldn't see very well because of the snow falling, so I went back down the ladder to see what was the matter. I was suddenly dragged with some force across the path, away from the ladder, and at about the same time, a very heavy amount of snow fell off the roof, taking half the roof with it. I would almost certainly have been badly injured or killed if I'd been at the top of the ladder. I don't know who or what pulled me away, but I like to think it was my guardian angel looking out for me. Angela, 23, London, England. I've got an angel who looks after me on the train on my way to work. I have to get a train at 7:55 in the morning to get to my office on time, although I sometimes get the 8:10 if I've had a bit of trouble getting up. It doesn't matter which one I take. It's always packed and I almost never get a seat. I don't mind too much unless it's really hot because the journey only takes about 20 minutes and I'm quite happy listening to my Walkman. The only really unpleasant thing about it, apart from all the people with bad breath or too much perfume on, is that I often seem to get jammed up against horrible men. Dear Goddess. They hardly ever say anything, but they're always trying to look down my top or get much closer to me than they need to. I don't know why some men do that. Do they really think they're going to get a date by being horrible and intimidating? Anyway, I don't have to worry about it anymore because there's an angel who watches out for me. I've never actually seen him, although I think I caught a glimpse of him once. But I've felt him and I've heard him. The first time he helped me, I was on the train, and there was a man standing in front of me who actually did start saying stuff to me about how I looked and how I was dressed. It was really horrible, and I couldn't get away because it was so crowded. Nobody else was taking any notice. They probably couldn't hear him, but I bet that they wouldn't have helped even if they could have. Normally, I'd have been listening to the radio, but the batteries had run down. I was trying to ignore him, but I was getting more and more upset when I felt a hand on my shoulder. Under the circumstances, I'm amazed that I didn't completely freak out, but it immediately felt so comforting that I didn't even think of turning round and seeing who it was. At the same time, I heard a lovely, deep, soft voice say, "Don't worry, Angela, I'll deal with this." His voice came from about a foot above me, and I'm 5'6", so he must have been pretty tall. The man who was talking at me didn't seem to have noticed anything until my angel said, "I don't think the lady's interested in anything you've got to say." And although his voice sounded just as soft and deep and lovely to me, he must have looked scary or something, because the man in front of me went white and shut up straight away. When the train stopped, the door was behind me and I got stuck getting off, so I didn't see who had helped me out. I didn't realise then that he was an angel. I just thought it was somebody being kind. Thank the goddess for men like that who are kind, by the way. But then it happened again the next week. Someone was staring at me, and I felt the angel's hand. It's very warm and heavy, and heard his voice again saying exactly the same thing, that I shouldn't worry and he'd deal with it. He did, and I looked for him and couldn't find him. This time, though, it did occur to me to wonder how someone I'd never even seen knew my name. After it had happened another few times, I realised that I was never going to get to see him, and in a way, I'm almost glad, because he would be quite frightening, going by the reaction he gets. The men all look terrified when he speaks to them. I don't think I'd see that side of him, though. I think I'd just see a beautiful angel with big hands and a deep, gentle voice. Don't get me wrong. It's not like I expect him to be there. I don't want to take advantage, but I always feel really safe knowing that he probably will be. That's the end of the chapter on guardian angels. Tomorrow I will resume with the chapter on messenger angels, which, judging by the length, will be a two-part video. And yes, hasta mañana, till we meet again. And have a beautiful evening. It's currently 5:17 p.m. on the 3rd of April 2025, and three hours and 35 minutes roughly of video, so tired. Worked hard today, worked hard. She works hard for her money. But I've enjoyed reading to you, beautiful people of planet Earth. And as always, Goddess bless, and don't forget to talk to your angels, and never ever let the bastards grind you down, no matter who they are or where they are. Just remember, don't be afraid to ask for the help of your angels if it's necessary. But also, don't be afraid to be your own angel. And someone's being creepy around you, say, "Oi, knock it off." But she was young, 23, and easily intimidated at that age. I remember being a bit more easily intimidated at that age too. Something quite wonderful happens when you've died and been brought back to life 15 times, and you get old and You no longer give a flying fuck what anyone thinks about you. You become a bit fierce, people have heard. But anyway, I've enjoyed reading to you, and outside it's raining again, and hopefully tomorrow will be a nicer day. Bye for now, people of Earth. Take good care, be of good cheer. Don't be afraid to be fierce in more ways than one, darlings. Bye for now.